Welcome to Your Mythology Book Club. I'm Daniel, and I'm a Greek mythology enthusiast. In this series, we're covering the Iliad. This is episode 9, covering books 16 and 17. In this first part, we'll tackle the huge and hugely important book 16, then we'll move on to cover book 17 in part 2. At the end of book 15, the Trojans had advanced again into the Greek camp. But it was different that second time, because the Trojans were led by the god Apollo himself, who completely obliterated the Greek defenses, including filling in that defensive ditch filled with spikes, while filling the Greeks with terror, and they ran headlong back into the camp. The destruction of the defensive ditch allowed the Trojans to drive their chariots right into the Greek camp. As this all happened very suddenly, the Greeks didn't have time to mount their chariots, putting them at a big disadvantage. To make things worse, the Greeks this time were pushed all the way back to the second line of beached ships, which included their homes, the wooden huts they'd built for shelter during their long siege of Troy. The only way for the Greeks to fight the mounted Trojans on anything like an even playing field was for the Greeks to climb up onto their ships and attack the mounted Trojans using very long, something like 30-foot long, pikes meant for ship-to-ship combat. And all the while, the Trojans are trying to set the ships on fire. If the ships burn, it would mean the Greeks would be completely stranded here in enemy territory, pinned against the sea, no way to escape, and therefore easily slaughtered to the last man. At the very closing scene of Book 15, Aias was up on the decks of his ships, jumping from ship to ship, stabbing down with that long naval pike at any Trojans who got too near with fire to burn the fleet. So the stakes are about as high as they can possibly get. Homer's really ramped up the drama here. Oh, and I'll mention now that books 16 and 17 are action-packed. And fortunately, they're covered by that excellent website we've discussed before, Homer's Trojan Theater. These are actually the last two books mapped on this website. And remember, this website is a tool that plots out, scene by scene on a map, the locations of the various heroes across several of these most tumultuous books of the Iliad. Be sure to make use of this tool to track the movements across the battlefield. You'll find the link in the show notes. And now, finally, in Book 16, we return in earnest to the central drama of the Iliad, when Patroclus will finally confront Achilles about the imminent destruction of the Greeks due to Achilles' refusal to participate in the fighting. Because all this about the Trojans invading the camp and trying to burn the ships, and the Greeks getting pushed to the very limit of survival, this is all backdrop. All of this was simply arranged by Zeus, the supreme god, in answer to Achilles and his mother Thetis' prayer to Zeus. We are returning now, finally in Book 16, to this central drama of the Iliad. Here, we will see Achilles faced with the consequences of that prayer and of his fatal flaw, his anger, and the effect that this has had on Patroclus and the ultimate outcome it will have on Patroclus. Remember, Achilles' anger began way back in Book 1 when Agamemnon, the high king of the Greeks, made two mistakes. First, Agamemnon refused to return the kidnapped woman Chryseis, daughter of the priest of Apollo, to her father in exchange for a ransom, which was the custom of the time, and would have allowed Agamemnon to keep his honor. Agamemnon ultimately returned Chryseis only when it became apparent that the curse imposed by Apollo on behalf of his priest could only be resolved if he relented and returned her without a ransom, which did impose a loss of honor upon Agamemnon. Now, the second mistake that Agamemnon then went on to make was by insulting Achilles, the best warrior of the Greeks. This insult was in the form of stealing an enslaved person from Achilles. This was the woman Briseis, to compensate himself for the loss of Chryseis and the accompanying loss of honor. Agamemnon chose Achilles from among all the Greek leaders for this particular dishonor because Achilles had been the most vocal in insisting that Agamemnon correct his first mistake, which had resulted in a plague from the god Apollo that was killing first their livestock and then the Greeks themselves. Now, Greek leaders speaking openly to one another about how best to conduct their business, especially war, was culturally important to them, with the ability as a good speaker being one of their most prized traits. And while their culture certainly wasn't a democracy, at least not at this point in history, there was a level of cooperation and respect among the noblemen. So Achilles was acting properly when he spoke up against Agamemnon in their leadership council. When Achilles was singled out by Agamemnon for this insult, to be the one and only among them to recompense Agamemnon for his loss, Achilles now made his mistake, which is that he succumbed to his extreme anger. Achilles decided he would refuse to fight anymore. And that alone would have really hurt the Greeks because, as we've seen in so many battle scenes now without Achilles, the best the Greeks can do without him is achieve a back and forth stalemate, a victory that's quickly followed by a setback over and over. But Achilles' anger was excessive. Remember, the opening lines of the Iliad are, "Sing, goddess, the wrath of Achilles, Peleus' son, the ruinous wrath that brought on the Achaeans woes innumerable, and hurled down into Hades many strong souls of heroes." In his excessive anger, Achilles didn't want to just passively sit and watch what would happen to the Greeks without him. He wanted the Greeks to be punished for the insult he had suffered. He wanted Zeus to give victory to the Trojans. And because Achilles' mother is the goddess Thetis, and Thetis was owed a favor by Zeus, Achilles asked for his mother to call in that favor and request Zeus to make the Trojans victorious for a time in the war, to show Agamemnon just how much he needed Achilles. So Agamemnon really messed up, and then Achilles messed up, and now here we are at the opening of Book 16 with the Greeks apparently about to be annihilated. Achilles' prayer to his mother has come true, and it's obvious to everyone now that it was Achilles who is keeping the Greeks in this fight. So let's return now to the opening of Book 16 and Patroclus. From books 1 through 10, Patroclus was sequestered with Achilles in Achilles' part of the camp, presumably fairly oblivious to the losses the Greeks had been suffering, since we never see them peeking out of their hut during all of this time. And then when we do see Achilles, when Agamemnon sends Odysseus and Aias to him with a peace offering that he rejects, Achilles doesn't express much interest in the status of the war. But in Book 11, Achilles saw the wounded Greek Machaon being brought into the camp, and in his pride and curiosity to confirm that it was indeed such an illustrious Greek as Machaon, son of the god Asclepios, who had been wounded through his prayer to Zeus through his mother Thetis, Achilles had sent Patroclus out into the wider Greek camp to look into the matter. And since then, we've encountered Patroclus a few times, each time seeing him exposed to the sufferings of his fellow Greeks due to the inaction of Achilles. Through these encounters, Patroclus' conscience starts to nag him about whether Achilles had been in the right this whole time. Finally, in Book 15, Patroclus had had enough. He had seen enough suffering to know he had to do something about it, even though he knew Achilles wouldn't. And when we last saw Patroclus, he had determined to approach Achilles in tears. He's coming to Achilles. And Achilles says to Patroclus, "Wherefore weepest thou, Patroclus, like a fond little maid that runs by her mother's side and bids her mother take her up, snatching at her gown, and hinders her in her going, and tearfully looks at her till the mother takes her up? Like her, Patroclus, dost thou let fall soft tears? Hast thou aught to tell the Myrmidons, or to me myself? Or is it some tidings out of Phthia that thou alone hast heard? They say that Menoetios, son of Actor, still lives, and Peleus, son of Aeacos, yet lives among the Myrmidons. For which twain, were they dead, right sore would we sorrow. Or dost thou lament for the sake of the Argives, how they perish by the hollow ships through their own transgression? Speak out, and hide it not within thy spirit, that we may both know all. Achilles is pretty oblivious to what Patroclus has been holding in, but Patroclus is about to let it all out. Finally, he responds to Achilles. O Achilles, son of Peleus, far the bravest of the Achaeans, be not wroth, seeing that so great calamity has beset the Achaeans. For verily, all of them that aforetime were the best are lying among the ships, smitten and wounded. Smitten is the son of Tydeus, strong Diomedes, and wounded is Odysseus, spearman renowned, and Agamemnon, and smitten is Eurypylos on the thigh with an arrow. And about them the leeches, skilled in medicine, are busy, healing their wounds. But thou art hard to reconcile, Achilles. Never then may such wrath take hold of me as that thou nurseth, thou brave to the hurting of others. What other man later born shall have profit of thee, if thou dost not ward off base ruin from the Argives? Pitiless that thou art, the knight Peleus was not then thy father, nor Thetis thy mother, but the grey sea bare thee, and the sheer cliffs, so untoward is thy spirit. But if, in thy counsel, thou art avoiding some oracle, and thy lady mother hath told thee somewhat from Zeus, yet me do thou send forth quickly, and make the rest of the host of the Myrmidons follow me, if yet I may prove some succor to the Danaans. And give me thy harness to buckle about my shoulders, if perchance the Trojans may take me for thee, and so abstain from battle, and the warlike sons of the Achaeans may take breath, wearied as they be, for brief is the breathing in war. And lightly might we that are fresh drive men wearied with the battle back to the citadel, away from the ships and the huts. So Patroclus has started off by asking for an apology, fearing Achilles' anger for the sympathy he's about to express for the Greeks that Achilles is so angry with. But he can't help it. Patroclus has been holding this in for too long. He runs down a list of just some of the Greeks who are wounded and out of the action. And then Patroclus lands a pretty hefty insult, unintentionally, but I'm sure just in the heat of his passion, referencing the anger, that famous wrath of Achilles, and wishing that he'd never be taken hold of by such wrath as Achilles has now. The line, "Thou brave to the hurting of others," is especially biting. But Patroclus concludes in a way that gives Achilles an out, musing aloud that maybe Achilles is avoiding some fate that his goddess mother has told him about. And that is true. Achilles had the choice to live a short but glorious life or a long but peaceful life. But he made that choice already when he left his home for this war. And then Patroclus says it, that seed of a plan that Nestor planted in Patroclus' mind way back in Book 11, which is that Patroclus could just dress up as Achilles, wear Achilles' armor, and lead the Myrmidons into battle. And that alone would be enough to send the Trojans off in a panic back to their city. Before we can even get to how Achilles responds to this idea, the narrator lands some heavy blows on us, saying, "So he spake and besought him in his unwittingness, for truly it was to be his own evil death and fate that he prayed for." The narrator has just let us know how this is going to turn out, which is that it's a tragic fate for Patroclus. And I get the sense that Achilles, son of a divine mother, and one who is himself interwoven and trapped by his own fate, caught between the divine and mortal worlds, I can feel that Achilles has some level of awareness of this moment's gravity. He can sense that his beloved Patroclus has just uttered the words that will bring about his own death. So I imagine Achilles pausing, taking his time, and only slowly and with great reluctance making his reply, hoping to find some way of wriggling out of the fate that Patroclus is becoming trapped in, like a great snake silently surrounding him, beginning to flex, beginning to squeeze. Then to him, in great heaviness, spake swift-footed Achilles. Ah me, Patroclus of the seed of Zeus, what word hast thou spoken? Neither take I heed of any oracle that I wot of, nor yet has my lady mother told me somewhat from Zeus. But this dread sorrow comes upon my heart and spirit, from the hour that a man wishes to rob me who am his equal, and to take away my prize, for that he excels me in power. A dread sorrow to me is this, after all the toils that my heart hath endured. The maiden that the sons of the Achaeans chose out for me as my prize, and that I won with my spear when I sacked a well-walled city. Her has mighty Agamemnon, the son of Atreus, taken back out of my hands, as though I were but some sojourner dishonorable. But we will let bygones be bygones. No man may be angry of heart forever. Yet verily I said that I would not cease from my wrath, until that time when to mine own ships should come the war cry and the battle. So I'll interrupt Achilles here and point out that Achilles has now quite suddenly said that he would cease from his anger. The anger that this whole epic about, it's gone. The blood is running cold in Achilles' veins now that he sees the trap closing in on them. It took Patroclus making this one request, and Achilles is willing to change his heart, to give up on his anger. But now there's no way out of the trap. Achilles' own vow before Agamemnon and the rest of the Greek leaders prevents him from doing anything but what Patroclus is asking for. I'm going to reread you the oath of Achilles that he swore way back in Book 1. But I will speak my word to thee, and swear a mighty oath therewith. Verily, by this staff, that shall no more put forth leaf or twig, seeing it hath forever left its trunk among the hills, neither shall it grow green again, because the axe hath stripped it of leaves and bark. And now the sons of the Achaeans that exercise judgment bear it in their hands, even they that by Zeus's command watch over the traditions. So shall this be a mighty oath in thine eyes. Verily shall longing for Achilles come hereafter upon the sons of the Achaeans, one and all. And then wilt thou in no wise avail to save them for all thy grief, when multitudes fall dying before man-slaying Hector. Then shalt thou tear thy heart within thee for anger that thou didst in no wise honor the best of the Achaeans. Now, with no way to escape from the words of his own vow that Agamemnon would be unable to save the Greeks when multitudes fall dying before man-slaying Hector, as that prayed for moment is now upon them, as much as Achilles now wishes he could take back his prayer, take back his vow, he cannot. The gods have granted it. And Achilles can now do no more than to grant Patroclus' request. But do thou on thy shoulders my famous harness, and lead the war-loving Myrmidons to the fight, if indeed the dark cloud of the Trojans hath mightily surrounded the ships, and if the Argives are driven back to the shore of the sea, holding but a narrow space of land, and the whole town of Troy hath come boldly against them, yea, for they behold not the visor of my helm shining hard at hand, swiftly would they flee, and fill the watercourses with dead, if mighty Agamemnon had been but kindly to me. But now they are warring round the camp. For not in the hands of Diomedes, the son of Tydeus, rageth the spear, to ward off destruction from the Danaans. Neither as yet have I heard the voice of the son of Atreus, shouting out of his hated mouth. But of Hector, the slayer of men, doth the voice burst around me, as he calls on the Trojans. And they, with their cries, fill all the plain, overcoming the Achaeans in battle. But even so, Patroclus, to ward off destruction from the ships, do thou fall on mightily, lest they even burn the ships with blazing fire, and take away our desired return. But do thou obey, even as I shall put into thy mind the end of my commandment, that in my sight thou mayest win great honor and fame of all the Danaans, and they may take away from him the fairest maiden, and thereto add splendid gifts. When thou hast driven them from the ships, return. And even if the loud thundering Lord of Hera grant thee to win glory, yet long not thou apart from me to fight with the war-loving Trojans. Thereby wilt thou minish mine honor. Neither do thou, exulting in war and strife, and slaying the Trojans, lead on towards Ilios, lest one of the eternal gods from Olympus come against thee. Right dearly doth Apollo the far-darter love them. Nay, return back when thou hast brought safety to the ships, and suffer the rest to fight along the plain. For would, O Father Zeus, and Athene, and Apollo, would that not one of all the Trojans might escape death, nor one of the Argives, but that we twain might avoid destruction, that alone we might undo the sacred coronal of Troy. So Achilles is allowing Patroclus to present himself in public as Achilles and to lead the Myrmidons in a last-ditch effort to save the Greeks. But he's made a demand as well. Patroclus is not to continue into the city of Troy, but simply to chase the Trojans out of the Greek camp and into the plain. Achilles would rather that all the Trojans and all the Greeks die just as long as he and Patroclus remain alive. To Achilles, Patroclus is the single most important person in the world, his reason for living. Achilles' anger, that great wrath, evaporated in the instant that he saw that his continuation brought pain to Patroclus and had entwined Patroclus into his own fate. That's love. But Achilles has previously promised that he wouldn't fight, not until the war came to his own ships. Achilles made that oath in fury, but he's now bound by it, no matter how much he would prefer to face Hector and all the armies of Troy on his own, rather than send Patroclus out to his death. But Achilles is bound by that oath he made, so Achilles will remain, while Patroclus dons Achilles' armor and leads the Myrmidons into battle. This is an unlooked-for reprieve for the Greeks, and an unexpected trap of his own devising for Achilles. And it's not a moment too soon. Remember where we left off in Book 15? Aias the Great, jumping from the deck of one ship to another, stabbing down at the Trojans with his 33-foot-long naval pike, trying to stop the Trojans who are trying to set the ships on fire. Well, he's tired. He's worn out. He's been up there hopping and stabbing this whole time. And he's the only big-name fighter still defending the ships against Hector and the Apollo-inspired Trojan army. So we shouldn't be surprised when the narrator recites, "Tell me now, ye muses that have mansions in Olympus, how first fire fell upon the ships of the Achaeans. Hector drew near, and the ashen spear of Aias he smote with his great sword, hard by the socket behind the point, and shore it clean away. And the son of Telamon brandished in his hand no more than a pointless spear, and far from him the head of bronze fell ringing on the ground. And Aias knew in his noble heart, and shuddered at the deeds of the gods, even how Zeus, that thundereth on high, did utterly cut off from him a veil in war, and desired victory for the Trojans. Then Aias gave back out of the darts. But the Trojans cast on the swift ship unwearying fire, and instantly the inextinguishable flame streamed over her. So the fire begirt the stern. Now, this is the sign. The firing of the Greek ships is it. This is the sign that Zeus has said he was waiting for to turn the tide of the battle. It's the moment that Zeus has spent so long engineering. And the firing of the ships is a sign that Achilles himself predicted. Another way that Achilles has bound himself in his fate through his excess of anger. Back in Book 9, in his anger during the embassy episode, Achilles' rejection of Agamemnon's peace offer, Achilles told the Greeks that he wouldn't return to battle until the ships were ablaze. And even then, he said he didn't think that Hector would dare to face him, even if he vanquished all the other Greeks. Achilles' exact words then, the message he charged Aias and Odysseus to give to Agamemnon were, "But go ye and declare my message. I will not take thought of bloody war until that wise Priam's son, noble Hector, come to the Myrmidons' huts and ships, slaying the Argives and smirch the ships with fire. But about mine hut and black ship, I ween that Hector, though he be very eager for battle, shall be refrained." Well, Achilles can't return to battle himself yet, because in his thoughtless anger, when he was ranting at the men of the embassy, Achilles said he wouldn't return to the fight until the fight was at his own ships, which hasn't yet happened. But he knows for Patroclus' sake that his friend wants to save the Greeks. So Achilles has to let Patroclus fight now, as fearful as he is for the danger his beloved will face. Caught in the web of his own oaths and anger, Achilles now says to Patroclus, "Arise, Patroclus of the seed of Zeus, commander of the horsemen, for truly I see by the ships the rush of the consuming fire. Up then, lest they take the ships, and there be no more retreat. Do on thy harness speedily, and I will summon the host." We now see Patroclus gearing up for war. A gearing up scene is, of course, a strong indication that we're in for an Aristeia. Patroclus' Aristeia, coming up here in Book 16. Of special note is the spear of Achilles, the famous Pelian ash, which was a ridiculously long and heavy spear whose shaft was made of ash wood. It had been given to Achilles' father, Peleus, by the centaur Chiron. Achilles is the only man who can wield the Pelian ash, so Patroclus chooses to take two regular spears instead. And also note the horses of Achilles, two of which were not mortal horses, but rather immortal animals. The horses Xanthos and Balios. These horses were referenced back in Book 10, the Dolaneia, when that foolish Trojan Dolan thought he would earn these immortal horses for spying on the Trojans on behalf of Hector. He would not have been able to control them. Only Achilles and Patroclus can control these powerful animals. So Patroclus is the only person who could possibly lead the Myrmidons as a convincing Achilles substitute. It's not just a matter of fitting into the armor. Oh, and be on the lookout later in the Iliad for the moment when the immortal horse Xanthos speaks. But for now, let's read Patroclus' gearing up scene. His goodly greaves, fitted with silver clasps, he first girt round his legs, and next did on around his breast the well-dight starry corslet of the swift-footed son of Aeacus. And round his shoulders he cast a sword of bronze, with studs of silver, and next took the great and mighty shield, and on his proud head set a well-wrought helm with a horsehair crest, and terribly knotted the crest from above. Then seized he two strong lances that fitted his grasp, only he took not the spear of the noble son of Aeacus, heavy and huge and stalwart, that none of the other Achaeans could wield, but Achilles alone availed to wield it, even the ashen Pelian spear that Chiron gave to his father dear, from the crown of Pelion, to be the bane of heroes. And Patroclus bade Automedon to yoke the horses speedily, even Automedon, whom he most honored after Achilles, the breaker of the ranks of men, and whom he held trustiest in battle to abide his call. And for him Automedon led beneath the yoke the swift horses, Xanthos and Balios, that fly as swift as the winds, the horses that the harpy Podarge bare to the west wind, as she grazed on the meadow by the stream of Okeanos. And in the side traces he put the goodly Pedassos, that Achilles carried away when he took the city of Eetion, and being but a mortal steed, he followed with the immortal horses. Achilles is now commanding the Myrmidons to get ready for battle, while Patroclus is busy putting on the distinctive armor of Achilles. Now, the Myrmidons were the elite troops of Achilles, and Achilles had kept them out of the war during this period of his own anger. So there's this whole fresh, elite group about to jump into battle behind Patroclus, who, as we'll see, is no slouch himself in war. We have not seen the Myrmidons in action yet. Their name to the ancients implied something of the meaning of ants, which to them gave the idea of swarming, loyalty, obedience, ruthlessness. The Myrmidons don't really have any personalities among them that come through in the story. While the narrator does go on to give a handful of them names and background stories, we don't get to know them as individuals at any point. In the Iliad, they serve as a fanatically loyal, effective fighting force. Meanwhile, Achilles went and harnessed all the Myrmidons in the huts with armor, and they gathered like ravening wolves with strength in their hearts unspeakable, that have slain a great horned stag in the hills and rend him piecemeal, and all their jaws are red with blood. And in a herd they go to lap up with their thin tongues the surface of the dark water in a dusky well, belching out the blood of the slaughter, their hearts steadfast within their breast, and their bellies swollen. Even so hastened the leaders and chiefs of the Myrmidons around the good squire of swift-footed Achilles. And among them all stood warlike Achilles, urging on the horses and the targeteers. But when Achilles had stationed them all and arrayed them well with their leaders, he laid on them a strong command. Myrmidons, let me find none of you forgetful of the threats wherewith by the swift ships ye threatened the Trojans through all the time of my wrath. And ye did each accuse me, saying, Hard-hearted son of Peleus, surely on Gaul thy mother reared thee, thou pitiless one, that restraineth thy comrades at the ships against their will. Nay, homewards, let us return again with our seafaring ships, since such an evil wrath hath sunk into thy heart. Even thus did ye often clamor against me in your gatherings. But now hath appeared the mighty work of war, wherewith in times past ye were in love. Therefore, let each man keep a stout heart in the battle with the Trojans. So spake he, and aroused the heart and valor of each of them, and the ranks were yet the closer serried when they heard the prince. And as when a man builds the wall of a high house with close-set stones to avoid the might of the winds, even so close were arrayed the helmets and bossy shields, and shield pressed on shield, helm on helm, and man on man, and the horsehair crests on the bright helmed ridges touched each other when they nodded, so close they stood by each other. Finally, before sending Patroclus out into the war, leading the Myrmidons, Achilles has one last thing to do. One last way in which he wants to provide protection for Patroclus, to ensure that his beloved will return safely from battle. Achilles goes into his hut and from a locked chest reveals a beautiful cup, sacred to Zeus and used only for making offerings to the Most High God. Achilles cleans the cup in the proper manner using purifying sulfur, then water, then washes his hands. Only once ritually purified does he pour into the cup wine and make his prayer to Zeus. King Zeus, Dodonaean, Pelasgian, thou that dwellest afar, ruling over wintry Dodona, and around thee dwell the Seloi, thy prophets, with unwashen feet, and couching on the ground, even as once thou didst hear my voice in prayer, and didst honor me, and mightily afflict the host of the Achaeans. Even now, too, fulfill for me this desire. For I myself will abide in the gathering of the ships, but my comrade I will send with many Myrmidons to war. To him do thou speed the victory, O far-seeing Zeus, and strengthen his heart within him, that Hector too may know whether my squire hath skill to war, even alone, or whether his hands invincible rage only when I enter the moil of war. But when he has driven from the ships the war and din of battle, scatheless then let him return to me at the swift ships with all his arms, and his comrades that fight hand to hand. Achilles has referenced Zeus's fulfillment of his previous prayer and asked that Zeus continue fulfilling his prayers by bringing Patroclus home safely. As the narrator does a handful of times throughout the Iliad, we get told immediately the divine response to a prayer. In this case, Zeus will grant Patroclus success in driving the Trojans out of the camp, but Zeus will not grant Patroclus' return. Patroclus, now gleaming in the armor of Achilles, leads the Myrmidons into battle, calling out to them, "Myrmidons, ye comrades of Achilles, son of Peleus, be men, my friends, and be mindful of your impetuous valor, so that we may win honor for the son of Peleus, that is far the bravest of the Argives by the ships, and whose close fighting squires are the best. And let wide-ruling Agamemnon, the son of Atreus, learn from his own blindness of heart, in that he nothing honored the best of the Achaeans." So spake he, and aroused each man's heart and courage, and all in a mass they fell on the Trojans, and the ships around echoed wondrously to the cry of the Achaeans. The Greeks and the Trojans, embattled throughout the camp, all see this fresh troop, the Myrmidons, streaming forth from the enclosure of Achilles' huts, led by a glorious leader in the shining bronze of Achilles. And the deception immediately works. Upon seeing the distinctive armor of Achilles, worn by a man leading the Myrmidons, who, by the way, are sometimes thought of as themselves wearing a distinctive black or brown armor to make them seem more ant-like, the Greeks must be elated and filled with a renewed sense of hope and vigor, while the Trojans are immediately fearful, seeing that Achilles himself has finally joined the battle, something that could turn the tide even at this late moment, with Aias faltering and all the other great heroes out of the action. But when the Trojans beheld the strong son of Menoetios, himself and his squire, shining in their armor, the heart was stirred in all of them, and the companies wavered, for they deemed that by the ships the swift-footed son of Peleus had cast away his wrath and chosen reconcilement. Then each man glanced round to see where he might flee sheer destruction. Patroclus and the Myrmidons give their Greek and Trojan onlookers little time to marvel, however glorious and important their sudden appearance in the battle may be. From their starting point at the ships of Achilles on the far right of the Greek camp, Patroclus leads the Myrmidons straight to the center of the camp, the ships of the long-deceased Protestilaos, where the fighting is most intense. Patroclus himself dives right into the fighting, and his sudden onslaught sends terror into the Trojan allies. But Patroclus first, with a shining spear, cast straight into the press, where most men were thronging, even by the stern of the ship of great-hearted Protestilaus. And he smote Pyrachmes, who led his Paeonian horsemen out of Amydon from the wide water of Axios. Him he smote on the right shoulder, and he fell on his back in the dust with a groan, and his comrades around him, the Paeonians, were afraid, for Patroclus sent fear among them all, when he slew their leader that was ever the best in fight. Then he drove them out from the ships and quenched the burning fire, and the half-burnt ship was left there, and the Trojans fled with a marvelous din. And the Danaans poured in among the hollow ships, and ceaseless was the shouting. And as when from the high crest of a great hill Zeus, the gatherer of the lightning, hath stirred a dense cloud, and forth shine all the peaks with sharp promontories and glades, and from heaven the infinite air breaks open, even so the Danaans, having driven the blazing fire from the ships, for a little while took breath. But there was no pause in the battle, for not yet were the Trojans driven in utter rout by the Achaeans, dear to Ares, from the black ships, but they still stood up against them, and only perforce gave ground from the ships. The half-burned ships of Protestilaus, smoldering, quenched, with Patroclus and the Myrmidons shining in the sun like the mountaintops after a storm. Now the tide has turned, and in rapid succession we find that some of the named Greek heroes are back in the fight. Menelaus is back, taking down Thoas, and Nestor's endearingly sincere son Antilochus spears a young Trojan ally named Antimneos, who is a favorite of Sarpedon. Antimneos' brother Maris is right there and tries to avenge the death. But Antilochus' own brother, Thrasymedes, is right there and fells Maris instead. There's an interesting little side note here that the father of the now dead Antimneos and Maris was one Amisodaros, king of Lycia, who raised the beast, the Chimera, that strangest of ancient monsters that had the head and body of a lion, a goat's head and udders somehow affixed to it, and a snake for a tail. Oh, and it could breathe fire. Anyway, his sons are now dead. Why didn't they bring the Chimera to the Trojan War? It had already been killed by a Greek hero named Bellerophon, riding the flying horse Pegasus. Here's a gruesome encounter between a Greek named Peneleos, who we surprisingly haven't heard much about, despite his having been both an Argonaut and one of Helen's suitors. Anyway, Peneleos and a Trojan named Lycon or Lyco. Then Peneleos and Lycon ran together, for with their spears they missed each other, yea, both had cast in vain. And instantly they ran together with their swords. There Lycon smote the socket of the horsehair crest, and his sword brake at the hilt. But Peneleos smote his neck behind the ear, and all the blades sank in, and naught but the skin held, and the head hung slack, and loosened were his limbs. Oof! Next, Meriones takes out Acamas, and Idomeneus spears a Trojan named Aramis through the mouth in another unnecessarily gory death that describes his eyes filling with blood and blood spurting from his mouth and nostrils. Patroclus is going to kill an Aramis later on, but that will have to be a different one. This Aramis is a goner. Telamonian Aias is looking for a chance to cast a spear at Hector, but Hector's well armored and has been doing his best to protect his fellow Trojans. But he now recognizes the obvious, that things have suddenly turned against him once again. And Hector hightails it. He rides his swift horses clean out of the Greek camp, leaving many of his Trojan allies still there. The Greeks are getting organized now. They're mounting a counteroffensive and driving the Trojans out of the camp. And while we can recall in Book 15 the god Apollo knocking down what remained of the Greeks' defenses and filling in that defensive ditch filled with spikes, Homer had used the wonderful metaphor of a sandcastle being knocked down to describe how easily the god undid the works of men. Well, now that defensive ditch is back because it's making it hard for the fleeing Trojans to escape the Greek camp. And Patroclus is there in his chariot, grinding the Trojans to death beneath his wheels. But ever where Patroclus saw the folk thickest in the rout, thither did he guide his horses with a cry, and under his axle-trees men fell prone from their chariots, and the cars were overturned with a din of shattering. But straight over the ditch, in forward flight, leaped the swift immortal horses that the gods gave for glorious gifts to Peleus. And the heart of Patroclus urged him against Hector, for he was eager to smite him. But his swift steeds bore Hector forth and away. And even as beneath a tempest the whole black earth is oppressed, on an autumn day, when Zeus pours forth rain most vehemently, being in wrath and anger against men who judge crooked judgments forcefully in the assembly and drive justice out, and reck not of the vengeance of the gods, and all their rivers run full, and many a scour the torrents tear away, and down to the dark sea they rush headlong from the hills, roaring mightily, and minished are the works of men. Even so, mighty was the roar of the Trojan horses as they ran. Having slaughtered the Trojans trapped against the outward defenses of the camp, Patroclus is now herding the remaining Trojans in a panic flight back into the camp, cutting them off from retreat and leading the Greeks in the continued destruction of as many Trojans as remain. Patroclus kills numerous named Trojans in this way, and we can imagine that the Myrmidons and the other Greeks are killing countless others. Seeing their destruction at hand and lacking the leadership of Hector, who has fled the scene, Sarpedon now calls out, "Shame, ye Lycians, whither do ye flee? Now be ye strong, for I will encounter this man, that I may know who is he that conquers here. And verily many evils hath he wrought, the Trojans, in that he hath loosened the knees of many men and noble." So spake he, and leaped with his arms from the chariot to the ground. Now Sarpedon, you may recall, is a mortal son of Zeus himself, and leader of an important group of Trojan allies from the kingdom of Lycia, which was on the far southern coast of what is now Turkey. Sarpedon wants to face off against Patroclus, whom we have to imagine he thinks at this point is Achilles. Now, we've seen mortals plucked off the battlefield before, favorites of the gods that their divine protectors didn't want to see die. It happened to Aeneas, son of Aphrodite, and it also happened to Paris, favorite of Aphrodite. So it shouldn't be surprising when the scene suddenly shifts and we hear a conversation between Zeus and Hera. "Ah, woe is me, for that it is fated that Sarpedon, the best beloved of men to me, shall be subdued under Patroclus, son of Menoetios. And in two ways my heart within my breast is divided, as I ponder whether I should catch him up alive out of the fearful war and set him down in the rich lands of Lycia, or whether I should now subdue him beneath the hands of the son of Menoetios." Then the ox-eyed lady Hera made answer to him, "Most dread son of Cronos, what word is this thou hast spoken? A mortal man long doomed to fate, dost thou desire to deliver again from death of evil name? Work thy will, but we all other gods will in no way praise thee. And another thing will I tell thee, and do thou lay it up in thy heart. If thou dost send Sarpedon living to his own house, consider lest thereon some other god likewise desire to send his own dear son away out of the strong battle. For round the great citadel of Priam war many sons of the immortals, and among the immortals wilt thou send terrible wrath. But if he be dear to thee, and thy heart mourns for him, truly then suffer him to be subdued in the strong battle beneath the hands of Patroclus, son of Menoetios. But when his soul and life leave that warrior, send death and sweet sleep to bear him, even till they come to the land of wide Lycia. There will his kindred and friends bury him, with a barrow and a pillar, for this is the due of the dead." So you might be asking yourself, why can't Zeus just whisk his beloved mortal son Sarpedon away, like apparently Aphrodite can do whenever she wants? Now, I'm going to point out that it's not productive to look for too much consistency in Greek mythology. Just like you're never going to find a single canonical rendering of the story of any given character across all existing versions of the myth, you're also not going to get consistency in ancient Greek theology either in these stories. However, in this instance, it's not that Zeus is more bound by fate or is more limited than Aphrodite. What I think Hera is objecting to is Zeus's consideration of going against the fated death of Sarpedon. Aeneas and Paris weren't fated to die at those times when Aphrodite saved them from battle, but Sarpedon is fated to die now. The relationship between the gods and the fates is complicated, not least because of the lack of a defined, hard and fast set of rules in these ancient stories. We're used to much more formally defined rules in our religion and in our fiction. Religious denominations in modern times differ from one another on theological points that, to outsiders, seem minor, while fans of modern fiction can endlessly debate the intricate details. Did Han shoot first? Things like that. You're wasting your time if you look at Zeus and Hera's debate over the fate of Sarpedon this way. Think back to Book 12, when Sarpedon was talking with his friend Glaukos about glory. Sarpedon himself beautifully expressed the Homeric view, how glory can only have any meaning if there is mortality. Ah, friend, if once escaped from this battle, we were forever to be ageless and immortal. Neither would I fight myself in the foremost ranks, nor would I send thee into the war that giveth men renown. But now, for assuredly 10,000 fates of death do every way beset us, and these no mortal may escape nor avoid. Now let us go forward, whether we shall give glory to other men, or others to us. This is a productive way of looking at Zeus and Hera's exchange, that, given immortality, we, humans, would shun the glorious deeds that bring meaning to the life of a Homeric warrior. But there's a lot else buried in here too. We can also think about how jealously the immortals guarded immortality, how mortality is what differentiates us from them. Asclepios, the physician and son of Apollo, was killed for discovering the secret of returning the dead to life. And then he was made a god himself, after which he seems to have switched sides and no longer raised any more dead humans. We can also get into the notion that each person has a fate, a fated time to die, a predetermined length of life. This is implied strongly by the very nature of the three goddesses of fate, the Moirai, whose names and roles use a weaving metaphor. Clotho, the first of the three, spins the thread of life. Lachesis determines its length, and Atropos, with her scissors, cuts the thread. The three Moirai are daughters of Zeus and the goddess Themis, who personifies justice and the divine order of the universe. If Lachesis had already determined the length of Sarpedon's life thread, then Hera objects to Zeus upsetting the natural order that keeps the immortals separate and better than the mortals. So there's a lot to dig into here, but really it's Sarpedon's own words about glory that bring the deepest meaning to not only this exchange between Zeus and Hera, but also to his impending death. Seeing that the death of his son Sarpedon is imminent, Zeus shed tears of blood that fall upon the battling heroes, a grim sign to all and a dramatic touch to this battle scene. Patroclus and Sarpedon both have jumped down from their chariots, each wanting to face the other in a duel amidst the blood rain. Patroclus strikes first, but rather than attacking Sarpedon, he kills Thrasymelos, squire of Sarpedon. Now, Sarpedon attacks, casting his shining javelin, aiming for Patroclus, but missing, killing the one mortal among Patroclus's three horses. As the horse Pedasos falls, tangled in the chariot leads, the chariot driver Automedon cuts Pedasos' leads, freeing the two immortal horses. Immediately, Sarpedon casts again, this javelin sailing harmlessly past Patroclus' left shoulder. Now, Patroclus finally casts once, and his spear lands squarely in Sarpedon's chest. Atropos has cut the thread. An example of a true Homeric hero to the end, Sarpedon's last thoughts, as though continuing his previous conversation with Glaukos, are of glory. And as when a lion hath fallen on a herd and slain a bull, tawny and high of heart, among the kine of trailing gait, and he perishes, groaning beneath the claws of the lion. Even so, under Patroclus did the leader of the Lycian shieldmen rage, even in death. And he called to his dear comrade, Dear Glaucus, warrior among warlike men, now most doth it behove thee to be a spearman and a hardy fighter. Now let baneful war be dear to thee, if indeed thou art a man of might. First, fare all about and urge on the heroes that be leaders of the Lycians to fight for Sarpedon, and thereafter thyself do battle for me with the sword. For to thee, even in time to come, shall I be shame and disgrace forever, all thy days, if the Achaeans strip me of mine armor, fallen in the gathering of the ships. Nay, hold out manfully, and spur on all the host. Patroclus sets his foot squarely upon the body of Sarpedon, and, as Homer puts it, so that he drew forth together the spear point and the soul of Sarpedon. Now the steeds of Patroclus are eager again for battle, but Glaucus, grieving for his friend Sarpedon, and still hurting from the wounds that Teucros had given him during the assault on the wall, prays aloud to Apollo. Hear, O prince, that art somewhere in the rich land of Lycia, or in Troia, for thou canst listen everywhere to the man that is in need, as even now need cometh upon me. For I have this stark wound, and my arm is thoroughly pierced with sharp pains, nor can my blood be stanched, and by the wound is my shoulder burdened, and I cannot hold my spear firm, nor go and fight against the enemy. And the best of men has perished, Sarpedon, the son of Zeus, and he succors not even his own child. But do thou, O prince, heal me this stark wound, and lull my pains, and give me strength, that I may call on my Lycian kinsmen, and spur them on to the war, and myself may fight about the dead man fallen. So spake he in his prayer, and Phoebus Apollo heard him. Straightway he made his pains to cease, and in the grievous wound stanched the black blood, and put courage into his heart. And Glaucus knew it within him, and was glad, for that the great god speedily heard his prayer. Glaucus is now healed. Apollo instantly answered his prayer by stopping his bleeding and relieving his pains. Glaucus' only mission now is seeking vengeance for Sarpedon. Glaucus urges on his fellow Lycians to fight, and then he seeks out the leaders of the Trojans themselves, especially Hector, who, you'll recall, fled from the battle as soon as Patroclus, appearing as Achilles, emerged leading the Myrmidons. Finding Hector, Glaucus reminds him of his duty to the allies who have come from afar to fight and to die for Troy. Hector, now surely art thou utterly forgetful of the allies, that for thy sake, far from their friends in their own country, breathe their lives away. But thou carest not to aid them. Sarpedon lies low, the leader of the Lycian shieldmen, he that defended Lycia by his dooms and by his might. Yea, him hath mailed Ares subdued beneath the spear of Patroclus. But friends, stand by him, and be angry in your hearts, lest the Myrmidons strip him of his harness, and dishonor the dead in wrath for the sake of the Danaans, even them that perished, whom we slew with spears by the swift ships. We don't get told how Hector specifically responds to Glaucus' speech, although we will see his response very soon. But the Trojans themselves react first with grief for the loss of Sarpedon, and then they're fired up to recommit themselves to going on the offensive against Patroclus and the Myrmidons. Oh, and it's not really explicitly stated anywhere in Book 16 exactly when or how the Trojans realize that they're fighting Patroclus and not Achilles, but this speech of Glaucus to Hector shows that by this point, they have made that realization. By the end of Book 16, they'll know for sure that they still have Achilles to deal with. Meanwhile, Patroclus is encouraging the two Aiases to go grab the corpse of Sarpedon, loot it, and kill any of his allies who try to stop them. This sets up the showdown over the body of Sarpedon, the Myrmidons and the other Greeks led by Patroclus and the two Aiases, against Hector and the Trojans. The Trojans advance, pushing the Greeks back for the first time since Patroclus' initial charge. Zeus, grieved for his son, drew baneful night above the strong battle, that round his dear son might be the woeful toil of war. Fighting in darkness now, despite it still being daytime, a Myrmidon named Epigeius is trying to pull the corpse of Sarpedon toward the Greek line when Hector himself smashes his helmeted head with a stone. The stone breaks in two, and Epigeius falls dead upon Sarpedon. Grieved for his comrade, who like himself had been in exile and had been taken in by Achilles' hero father Peleus, they had been like brothers. Patroclus, in a rage, charges straight at the line of the Trojans and Lycians, heaving another rock at them and killing a Lycian named Sthenelaus. The whole enemy line backs off, sensing Patroclus' rage and power in this time of his Aristeia. So they back off, but they are not in retreat. Glaucus kills a Myrmidon named Bathycles by spearing him right through the chest. Meriones strikes Laogonos, son of the priest of Idaean Zeus, Zeus of Mount Ida that looms over the city. Aeneas throws a spear at Meriones, who ducks, and it sails harmlessly overhead. Aeneas is kind of hapless, but he's got an interesting story that does seem underdeveloped within the Iliad. He's the son of the goddess Aphrodite. He got miraculously saved from death by her earlier in the Iliad, so I can see why the Romans picked him to build their mythology upon. Spoiler alert, Rome traces its foundation to hapless old Aeneas here, who survives the war and escapes the ruin of Troy with his elderly father and son. Anyway, Aeneas here wants to do some trash talking, but right after missing a spear throw is not the best time. He says to Meriones that you're a good dancer, but my spear would have stopped you if I'd have hit you with it. Yeah, weak. Meriones responds with some proper Homeric hero trash talking. Aeneas, it is hard for thee, strong as thou art, to quench the might of every man that cometh against thee in battle. Yea, thou too art immortal. And if ever I should cast at thee and strike thee in the midst with the sharp bronze, quickly shouldst thou, for all thy valor and trust in thy hands, give glory to me, and thy soul to Hades of the famous steeds. Now that's more like it. Not even insulting, really. Just saying if I happen to throw a spear at you, and I happen to hit you, then despite being a valorous man, you're going to end up in Hades, and I'll get your glory. Basic but effective trash talking. But for some reason, Patroclus here rebukes Meriones, insisting that they need to be fighting now, not talking. To be fair, it seems at this point that the narrator just needed a segue. We're about to transition away from the specific showdown over Sarpedon's corpse, over to Zeus and his grander plan for the next steps in the war. And not a moment too soon, because Sarpedon's completely covered in dust and blood and spent arrows and sling stones. And we get a really nasty metaphor now relating the thronging of men over his corpse to the gathering of buzzing flies about a milk pail and a dairy. Really a very unpleasant, unsavory image to roll around in your mind while you're also thinking about this dead body sitting out in the sun for so long. So what's Zeus thinking? He's debating the manner in which Patroclus will die. Now, we've known all along that Patroclus won't survive his Aristeia. Zeus is considering allowing Hector to just kill Patroclus right here. There's something attractive to this idea for Zeus. It would allow the Trojans to secure Sarpedon's body for proper burial. But no, Zeus decides otherwise. He's going to allow Patroclus to continue on for a time to drive the Trojans back to the city. And straight away, Zeus puts terror into Hector's heart, who again, for the second time this book, now turns and flees, jumping into his chariot, swerving around and tearing off towards the city, shouting for his comrades to do the same as well. The narrator gives Hector a little out, saying that he could sense Zeus's change of heart, for he knew the turning of the sacred scales of Zeus. Okay, Hector's not a seer, but he's also not a coward. He's a pawn, like every other human here. There is a general rout of the Trojans, and the Greeks begin chasing them. Sarpedon's body is left alone, and Zeus sends Apollo to retrieve it. Prithee, dear Phoebus, go, take Sarpedon out of the range of darts, and cleanse the black blood from him, and thereafter bear him far away, and bathe him in the streams of the river, and anoint him with ambrosia, and clothe him in garments that wax not old, and send him to be wafted by fleet convoy, by the twin brethren Sleep and Death, that quickly was set him in the rich land of wide Lycia. There will his kinsmen and clansmen give him burial, with barrow and pillar, for such is the due of the dead. And Apollo does this, preparing Sarpedon for burial and transporting him to his homeland of Lycia. It's interesting here that Apollo can do this, because there are instances in Greek mythology where the gods are averse to the presence of death. Not sure if it's the fact that Sarpedon is well dead by now and not actively dying, or just the lack of a consistent canonical set of rules here. But I'm thinking especially about Artemis and her devoted follower Hippolytos in the Euripides play of the same name. She's sympathetic towards him, but once he's dying, she pieces out, very clearly stating that she can't be around death. Another inconsistency. Anyway, let's get back to the battle and Patroclus. Oh, Patroclus. It seems that Zeus was not doing you a favor by choosing to spare you at the showdown over Sarpedon's corpse. But Patroclus cried to his horses and Automedon, and after the Trojans and Lycians went he, and so was blindly forgetful in his witlessness, for if he had kept the saying of the son of Peleus, verily he should have escaped the evil fate of black death. But ever is the wit of Zeus stronger than the wit of men, for he driveth the valiant man in flight, and easily taketh away the victory. And then again himself rouseth men to fight. So now he roused the spirit of Patroclus in his breast. Remember, Achilles had given Patroclus one clear rule when allowing him to pose as him, take his armor, lead the Myrmidons, and chase the Trojans out of the Greek camp. Don't attack the actual city of Troy. But once Patroclus had seen that Zeus has just now put terror into Hector's heart, he's watched Hector flee in his chariot, and the Trojans and their allies are following him. What's Patroclus going to do? The whole Greek army is going to chase after them, and Patroclus, in the power and glory of this, his Aristeia, he's been leading the Greeks today. How could he not chase them to the city? He's been set up. He's running headlong now towards his death, a death orchestrated by Zeus himself. But Patroclus isn't dead yet, and his Aristeia is just now coming into its full glory. What happens next is a list of who Patroclus kills. There whom first, whom last, didst thou slay, Patroclus, when the gods called thee deathward? Adrestos first, and Autonoos, and Echolos, and Paramos, son of Megas, and Epistor, and Melanippos, and thereafter Elassos, and Molios, and Pylartes. These he slew, but the others were each man of them fain of flight. Patroclus kills all these men, charging forward, while countless others flee ahead of him, just trying to escape his unstoppable wrath. Patroclus reaches the walls of Troy, the very place Achilles had warned him not to go to. And now, the narrator tells us very clearly that the Greeks would have taken Troy by the might of Patroclus, if not for, well, let's have Homer tell us. Then would the sons of the Achaeans have taken high-gated Troy by the hands of Patroclus, for around and before him he raged with the spear, but that Phoebus Apollo stood on the well-builded wall with baneful thoughts towards Patroclus and succoring the Trojans. Thrice clomb Patroclus on the corner of the lofty wall, and thrice did Apollo force him back and smote the shining shield with his immortal hands. But when for the fourth time he came on like a god, then cried far-darting Apollo terribly, and he bespake him, "Give back, Patroclus of the seed of Zeus. Not beneath thy spear is it fated that the city of the valiant Trojans shall fall. Nay, nor beneath Achilles, a man far better than thou." Patroclus backs off. He backs way off. It took those 4 times of climbing the walls and being pushed down each time, and then it took the words of Apollo ringing in his ears, but Patroclus gets the message. The blood must have suddenly run cold in his veins. He had been forgetful of Achilles' warning, so long as his power lasted, and the gods let him continue raging in his Aristeia. But now, Patroclus must be very aware, finally remembering the words of Achilles and maybe the tone in which Achilles had spoken to him. It was obvious to us at the time that Achilles had a bad feeling about how this plan of Patroclus's would end. And Patroclus knew Achilles so much better than any of us could have. Is Patroclus realizing now, is he putting the pieces together, that his time is now very short? Or is he just reacting to the terror of being threatened by the very great divine son of Zeus, Phoebus Apollo? The scene now shifts to the Scaean Gate, to Hector, where he's run in the panic that Zeus put into his heart not so long ago. And Hector's thinking, should I turn my horses around and get back into the fight? Or should I call it general retreat and get everyone back inside the walls where we can regroup? This is how Apollo finds Hector, but the god appears in the form of Hector's uncle Asios. And Apollo, as Asios, says to Hector, "Hector, wherefore dost thou cease from fight? It does not behove thee. Would that I were as much stronger than thou as I am weaker. Thereon quickly should thou stand aloof from war and to thy hurt. But come, turn against Patroclus thy strong-hooved horses, if perchance thou mayest slay him, and Apollo give thee glory." And that's all it takes. Asios, Apollo, blends back into the battle to continue encouraging on the Trojans to the fight. And Hector now has a new mission, not just to attack the Greeks, but specifically to attack Patroclus. Hector drives his chariot now right at Patroclus, who sees Hector coming and jumps down onto the ground to face his attacker, a spear in one hand and a huge rock in the other. The chariot is bearing down upon him. Patroclus heaves the stone. It hits Hector's chariot driver, Cebriones, an illegitimate son of Priam and therefore half-brother of Hector, hits him in the forehead, crushing his skull. The dead man falls from the chariot, and Patroclus, suddenly now again a fan of trash talking, after admonishing Meriones for doing just that earlier, out on it, how nimble a man, how lightly he diveth. Yea, if perchance he were on the teeming deep, this man would satisfy many by seeking for oysters, leaping from the ship, even if it were stormy weather, so lightly now he diveth from the chariot to the plain. Verily among the Trojans there too be diving men. Okay, I will say Patroclus at least had a better taunt than Meriones with his, "Hey, I could kill you and then you'd be dead." So maybe not totally hypocritical of Patroclus here to indulge himself for just a moment. Patroclus now leaps upon Cebriones' corpse, for the looting. And of course, Hector jumps down from his now driverless chariot to confront his brother's killer. The two fight like lions, and these twain strove for Cebriones, like lions, that on the mountain peaks fight, both hungering, both high of heart, for a slain hind. Even so, for Cebriones' sake, these two masters of the war cry, Patroclus, son of Menoetios, and renowned Hector, were eager each to hew the other's flesh with the ruthless bronze. They're literally pulling the corpse apart the way lions might with a kill. Hector yanking on the head, Patroclus pulling on a foot, while around them the opposing armies mass and fight in an ongoing grinding stalemate. A battle massed around a tug of war over the dead body of Cebriones. This even match lasts until evening, as the sun is lowering and the Greeks come out ahead and manage to pull the body toward their side and strip it of its valuables. With this finally accomplished, Patroclus now attacks the Trojan army directly, 3 times charging them, shouting a deafening war cry. And each of these 3 times he kills 9 men. And in a mirror of his attack upon the walls of Troy, it was on the 4th attempt that, well, again, let's hear it from Homer. But when the 4th time he sped on like a god, thereon to thee, Patroclus, did the end of life appear. For Phoebus met thee in the strong battle in dreadful wise. And Patroclus was not ware of him coming through the press, for hidden in thick mist did he meet him, and stood behind him, and smote his back and broad shoulders with a downstroke of his hand, and his eyes were dazed. And from his head Phoebus Apollo smote the helmet, that rolled, rattling away with a din beneath the hooves of the horses, the helm with upright socket, and the crests were defiled with blood and dust. Not of old was it suffered that the helm with horsehair crest should be defiled with dust, nay, but it kept the head and beautiful face of a man divine, even Achilles. But as then Zeus gave it to Hector to bear on his head, yet was destruction near him. And all the long-shadowed spear was shattered in the hands of Patroclus, the spear great and heavy and strong and sharp, while from his shoulders the tasseled shield with the baldric fell to the ground. And the Prince Apollo, son of Zeus, loosened his corslet, and blindness seized his heart, and his shining limbs were unstrung, and he stood in amaze. Having come up from behind him, hidden by his divine obscuring mist, and knocking the helmet off his head and breaking his spear, and then loosening his armor, Patroclus is now speared from behind by this guy named Euphorbos. But even this doesn't kill Patroclus. Unarmed and still alive, Patroclus retreats. He moves towards the Greek line. Hector sees Patroclus backing off and strikes. He spears Patroclus in the gut, driving the sharp bronze clear through. Now Patroclus falls. And maybe we're supposed to take some lesson from this, from how Apollo killed Patroclus. Something about humans getting above their station, that approaching the divine in their glory is not right for mere humans, and the gods will put us in our place if we get too self-important. But it sure doesn't feel like that, does it? It feels like Apollo was unnecessarily sneaky about this and not at all glorious, just using his power to toy with Patroclus and being so sneaky about it. Coming up behind Patroclus, no need for that. You are immortal, Apollo. It's not like Patroclus could have killed you even if he'd seen you coming. I think the ancients worshiped the gods because of their power. Admirable qualities other than power weren't necessarily relevant. You need to placate Apollo to get him to alleviate a plague, like at the beginning of the Iliad. You need the various gods to exercise their powers on your behalf if you're in the ancient world. They're not role models for ethical behavior. Ethics evolved within philosophy, independent of the religious traditions of the ancient pre-Christian Western world. I know these differences between their worldview and ours intellectually, but it still doesn't always sit right, and this is one of those times. Apollo was sneaky. He disarmed Patroclus, and then it still took 2 separate Trojans taking cheap shots at dazed Patroclus to take him down. That's how I feel about it. Hector, cheap shot champ, very undeservedly chooses to taunt Patroclus now. I'm not really feeling it, but it's important, so I'll read what he said. But I'm reading it with less than my usual enthusiasm, Hector. Patroclus, surely thou saidst that thou wouldst sack my town, and from Trojan women take away the day of freedom, and bring them in ships to thine own dear country, Fool, nay. In front of these were the swift horses of Hector, straining for speed for the fight, and myself, in wielding the spear, excel among the war-loving Trojans, even I, who ward from them the day of destiny. But thee shall vultures here devour. Ah, wretch, surely Achilles, for all his valor, availed thee not, who straightly charged thee as thou camest, he abiding there, saying, Come not to me, Patroclus, lord of steeds, to the hollow ships, till thou hast torn the gory doublet of man-slaying Hector about his breast. So surely he spake to thee, and persuaded the wits of thee in thy witlessness. Ah, but it turns out that Patroclus isn't dead, not quite yet, and from the brink of death, that moment of prophecy between two worlds, Patroclus now speaks, faintly but clearly audible to Hector. Boast greatly as thou now, Hector, for to thee have Zeus, son of Cronos, and Apollo given the victory, who lightly have subdued me, for themselves stripped my harness from my shoulders. But if 20 such as thou had encountered me, here had they all perished, subdued beneath my spear. But me have a ruinous fate, and the son of Leto slain, and of men Euphorbus. But thou art the third in my slaying. But another thing will I tell thee, and do thou lay it up in thy heart. Verily, thou thyself art not long to live, but already doth death stand hard by thee, and strong fate, that thou art to be subdued by the hand of noble Achilles, of the seed of Aeacus. Even as so he spake, the end of death overshadowed him, and his soul, fleeing from his limbs, went down to the house of Hades, wailing its own doom, leaving manhood and youth. Hector responds, not strongly, Patroclus, wherefore to me dost thou prophesy sheer destruction? Who knows but that Achilles, the child of fair trust Thetis, will first be smitten by my spear and lose his life? Do you think Hector will kill Achilles? Do you? We're approaching this final showdown. There's nothing left for Achilles to lose. How will he respond to this terrible news of Patroclus' death? So spake he, Hector, and drew the spear of bronze from the wound, setting his foot on the dead, and cast him off on his back from the spear. And straightway with the spear he went after Automedon, the godlike squire of swift-footed Aeacides, for he was eager to smite him. But his swift-footed immortal horses bear him out of the battle, horses that the gods gave to Peleus, a splendid gift. Patroclus' squire Automedon escapes with those immortal horses, but Patroclus' body and the armor of Achilles are left there on the battlefield. This is not a situation the Greeks will accept. And this is the end of Book 16. Next up, Book 17, the fight over Patroclus' remains.